Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Poz, for the two-man power trip. And of course, joining me is the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. Outside of of course, the TKO antitrust deal settled, and there's always big stories in WWE and AEW. But outside of that this week, there's a lot of smaller, interesting stories. And last week, I kind of felt like I wasn't at my best. I was a little bit under the weather, and I didn't have as many notes as typically I do. This time I went a little bit crazy. I think I'm up to like 36 pages.
Oh my God, damn! You know, when you talk about that antitrust lawsuit with UFC, I kind of thought that they were definitely going to just settle and quote unquote lose, I guess you could say, but uh, create a settlement because I saw what TKO did with MLW. Now, if obviously if WB was still in full control, Jerry McDivitt was going after it. I don't think $20 million. I think they would have eventually got out of it. But it seems like TKO is like Time Warner and WCW used to be, and Turner Broadcasting used to be, where they're like, "Oh, we got a lawsuit, let's just settle it." Right? I mean, $335 million. There was 1,200 fighters, so they each get what, 280 apiece. I mean, it's just crazy that they agreed to $335 million lawsuit settlement. I think.
So it's interesting with the MLW lawsuit. I never thought it was going to be like an amount that would like devastate them, but I thought the lasting impact would be losing and having an effect on what claimed to be monopolistic type of practices, right? So that
Right.
it would restrict their ability to do business necessarily as they like to or as they're alleged to have done. So that seemed important to settle. Excuse me. In this situation, settling was important just because of the potential financial impact of it. From what I gathered in terms of listening to experts in the UFC and also legal matters, just reading what they've been writing, um, that it could have been as much as 1.2 billion in damages, and the court. I'm not sure how this works, but the court would have the opportunity to have treble. I guess a fancy way of saying triple damages. So it could have been like 3.6 billion dollars in damages. So for TKO, I think the fact that there was the opportunity to settle was important for them. For the fighters, um, this could have. It seemed like they almost had their day in court, but then it was, somebody was saying that two potential lawsuits would have to be combined again into one. I'm not sure exactly how that'll work, but it was a lot of money potentially in hand. Now, how much money the fighter that maybe had a handful of undercard fights or even like semi-main event fights will get is in question. So first we have to remember, I'm not sure the structure, of course, of the legal fees, but in looking it up, as I referred to, I think last time with MLW, typically with an antitrust suit, the lawyers get 33 to 40%. So that's a pretty big chunk to take off the top. The next thing that I saw was that it seems that the amounts will sort of be relative to the original payouts or sort of like kind of like the place on the card. I don't know if it'll be as mysterious as like when Jim Ross had to give the payouts to WWE wrestlers on house shows, but it seems like Brock Lesnar, Anderson Silva, the guys that were on top in this time period win again. So maybe Rampage Jackson doesn't have to do like any hand behind my back fights anymore or anything like that. But so those guys may get, over and above the average fighter. So there's not necessarily an average fighter.
Oh, okay.
It'll be depending on the place on the card. So it doesn't change much for the UFC in the future. They can continue to do business as they are, but there are, other viable options that, certainly the UFC is the NFL, the NHL, whatever of its sport. It basically always has been in North America. But as we'll see in a second, there are other options, some that are surprising.
Yeah. Well, with Bellator, right? They get bought out by PFL, so PFL will absorb them, I guess, in 2026 is what I was reading or gleaning from what I was reading. So that means that from 2024 to 2026, there's going to be or going to need a home because Bellator will still operate as normal. So they already had a bunch of shows light up, obviously Belfast and a bunch of other ones, which are coming up very, very soon. So how does that work, and where do they land? Where will we be able to see them?
So as far as I gather, I don't follow the MMA world as much as I used to. Um, that there was a fight literally as we're recording it today, or I'm not sure if Belfast time, maybe it happened already, or maybe it's not happening for several hours, but it's happening today for all intents and purposes. But people were like, where's there going to be a home? And like, I'm thinking like, I don't know, does like CBS Sports Network still exist? Or like, is it going to be streaming on, one of those new apps, right? Like Bellator, it's kind of like low rent would be unfair to say, but like it's always been like a semi top promotion, but it never like popped, right? But lo and behold, they're like it's going to be on Max, and that's like really we have no idea of the financials, but that's a real rabbit, out of the hat. That one caught me by surprise. Like how long have we been waiting for AEW to do more with Max? Everyone's waiting for that, and
Yeah.
look, they got they got Bellator basically for a song or like absorbing whatever debts, basically, if I understand correctly. So here you have this brand that you have on Max. So that's a pretty nice accomplishment of the PFL, which I kind of thought was just like, that meme was like shoveling money into like the furnace, because like they're always like announcing shows, but I don't know if there's like any buzz to it, any like high fan
Right.
engagement.
Right, and plus, when you look at it, when Bellator fought PFL, the Bellator fighters destroyed them. It was 5-1, right? And Bader was the only one that lost. And obviously, not to make an excuse for Bader, but you saw the size difference there. I mean, he's a smaller heavyweight going to get up against a pretty big guy, but in Ferreira there. But when you look at it, it's like, wow, Bellator is better than PFL. They should get their own home. But then when you look, you're like, Max, holy crap, how the hell did they get Max before AEW did? Like that was a shocker. I was surprised about that.
Yeah, like I don't know the status of Showtime now, what they've been up to for the last. Well, I know that they canceled their boxing thing, right? But like
Yeah,
for
yeah.
years, like there would be, and they were good promotions at the time, especially before they
Awesome, yeah.
got watered down, like Strike Force, right? Like those type of promotions. I think there was like a little bit of like Ken Shamrock in London. That was kind of a disaster fight or whatever. But for the most part, like Showtime said, if anything, like a Bellator would seem like a fit like with Showtime historically. But Max has always been like very careful about like, okay, we had championship boxing. They canceled that a number of years ago. So that was really impressive. So what is this all to say, right? Like, what does it mean for wrestling when there's new deals in MMA? Sometimes it means nothing, right? But oftentimes they're kind of like cousins, almost first cousins. We could see that with TKO, obviously. Not to go back, in its history. Certainly, UFC was marketed against. But wrestling to get attention is one of the first things. So they're not that far away. A lot of crossover fans. Um, but does it mean anything for AEW ever being on Max, like to a bigger degree? Maybe it depends on the next contract, right? The other, which is of course a much smaller type of circumstance, is United Fight Alliance signed a deal with Valley Sports regional networks to air, I think, multiple times on their lineup. Maybe like they didn't go so far as to say filler programming. I mean, you wouldn't in the PR release, but that was a little bit of the sense that I was getting. So we remember Valley's, right, from Diamond, from Sinclair, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
that we've been talking about years ago. And I've been writing about it even before that. Like, okay, now that they have these RSNs, when it seemed like it was still a thing, that it's another step for a Ring of Honor to get attention, and now you have MMA on there. And United Fight Alliance, good for them. They're finding a niche of like they're going to all the regional sports networks, across the country, and they're getting exposure for themselves to sort of like build their footprint by footprint. I'm not sure how important like pro wrestling is in like on a regional sports network these days. Like sometimes you could get more attention online and more eyeballs if it's not paying you a significant amount. I mean, depending on MLW's deals, just because being sports is so limited in exposure, like following a UFA model, if being is okay with that, to get more exposure through that way might not be the worst idea.
Crazy to think of another fight promotion getting some legs before a wrestling promotion gets some legs. You know what I mean? Like you would think like AEW's been on TV that they're going to get some legs, and all of a sudden Bellator, who you think is absorbed, they get on Max. So it's interesting with UFA and all these other fighting promotions to see like what MMA league is going to jump a wrestling league for a better deal. I just curious to see like just the trajectory of smaller wrestling organizations other than WWE and smaller MMA organizations other than UFC.
As we were talking about like reputation of pro wrestling, and certainly outside of Vince McMahon's recent, the recent allegations against him for sure. WWE is like very, mainstream now for the most part. With highs and lows, like people are like, it's okay, it's harmless, I'm not into it, whatever. But like generally, pro wrestling, like programmers and network executives, they're still like have to think about it. Do I want to put this on? And even though like mixed martial arts certainly has its roots, right?
In wrestling, yep.
No rules. People thought about it. We're old enough to remember that, right? But like, still, you could like use it as filler program. It's kind of like, I don't know, kickboxing in like the early '90s, right? Like on ESPN2, which I love. The K1 on there, but like you could use it for that type of programming. But pro wrestling, you sort of have to justify it a little bit more. Actually, not to make our notes, our discussion even longer today, but something when I should have been sleeping, didn't sleep well last night, was that the WPIX 11. I think that's also your affiliate, John, for the CW. So. Yep. It seems like they're in a bit of trouble with potentially keeping the CW on there. So let me. Sorry, I didn't put this in the notes. Let me make sure that So Nexstar was fined $1.2 million by the FCC and could lose control of CW flagship WPIX in New York. FCC determined that local TV giant Nexstar takeover of WPIX in 2020 violated federal limits on station ownership. The regulatory agency ordered Mission Broadcasting, Nexstar's partner WPIX, to sell the station. Failing that, Nexstar could put the station under its umbrella and then shed other stations in its portfolio in order to remain under the ownership cap. The FCC also fined the company $1.2 million. So what does this mean? So we used to hear about this a lot as we kept looking for that Sinclair deal to purchase Tribune, where you're only allowed to own a certain amount of media in a market, or maybe a total footprint of media across the U.S. is probably more of the issue with Nexstar, because I don't know what else they would own in New York. So you use like a railroad company, which is like you don't own it, but you control it, and you put your media assets there. So it's like a place to park yourself. So the FCC has been pretty tough on this. They were tough on it with Sinclair, and they're tough on it here. So imagine if WPIX is sold, and whoever purchases it, if Nexstar doesn't bring it back in, I think that they would look to do that, right? The number one market. How much can you have a footprint of the U.S. if you don't have New York? But if they don't, right, and NXT is going there, imagine NXT going to a network that doesn't even have New York over the air.
Oof, crazy to think that's like the flagship, like you said, that's like the lead dog there. But just changing gears a little bit here, go back into the wrestling world, go back into a little bit of BushiRoad. What's going on with BushiRoad? Not only New Japan, but maybe a little bit of Stardom as well.
So first, I love Eventbrite. It's grassroots. It's like a ticket selling platform, and like we talked about with TNA, once in a while they bless us with data that most people are like, okay, but I pay attention to it. So New Japan, as we know, for the most part, for their big shows in the U.S., right, they're going, and Canada, they're going to use Ticketmaster. So, but when they have, right, they were doing some of those smaller shows, they do stuff at the dojo, they have meet and greets, and so on. So they've had 40 events that they've listed on Eventbrite. And again, these aren't all wrestling shows. Some of these are like meet and greet type events. One of them was even like a press conference at their show. 40 events. There have been 12,200 people that attended these 40 events. That includes Dojo, New Beginnings, not this year's, but past, as well as several meet and greets. So an average of 305 people attended the event. So I wouldn't make too much of that, right, because it's a lot of things mixed in together, but it's an interesting data point that we don't often get. So, but in terms of New Japan and their upcoming schedule, so something that we don't often focus on and is kind of under the radar, kind of like NXT in the Florida Loop, is their Academy shows. So March 23rd, they have their third showcase upcoming. But in terms of the two bigger shows that we've talked about, Windy City Riot on April 12th, again, the sales are slowed down. Pretty much everyone who wants a ticket has it. So they just sold 31 new tickets in the last 7 days, according to WrestleTix, when I captured this on March 20th. That doesn't account for resale sales. May 11th, which we talked about in Ontario, California, that there was some time to keep building things up. So as they announced, they didn't announce necessarily more talent, but they announced that World Heavyweight, Openweight, Strong Tag Team, and Strong Women's Championships will be on the line. Selling 83 tickets in 7 days. So that's not bad when you have about 7 weeks to go. Tickets distributed 1,638 with a current seller of 3,034, but this is a 10,000 seat building. So could easily see them getting to over 2,000, and depending on like the talent announced and what's announced, it could go upwards from there. And Stardom, and I think this is based on their approach to the market right now, I think these are always like a smart way to go. 2,300 arena show in WrestleMania weekend, they announced a number of new talents that will be appearing there. So I think they'll do well. I don't have the price for the tickets, but I think if they did charge a little bit more for those tickets, that they would do well regardless.
Now, as far as TNA wrestling is concerned, what's the latest on TNA? Because they've got some shows coming up, and some maybe not selling so well so far.
Yeah, so the Palms Casino, we know they're double shot over there, but looking at Rebellion, tickets distributed 348. So it looks like at the moment they're sticking there. We know previously in Vegas it picked up quickly. Of course, you can do comps or different type of deals to fill the seats better if you need to. But 348 tickets distributed, just 15 sold in the last 7 days. 15. At the 2300 Arena on upcoming, actually, as we're recording this, it looks like 2.5 rows deep in terms of tickets sold. Interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. I believe last year in Albany they had some trouble with the on sale date, like having to be moved. This time again, so it was supposed to be on sale last weekend. I think it's now on sale this weekend, May 3rd in Albany at the Washington Avenue Armory. Last week we talked about their relationship that they established with Arena Football. Cincinnati was just announced for May 18th and 19th. Megacorp Pavilion. It's actually in the Cincinnati area, Newport, Kentucky, a place that they've been before. So just to summarize, Impact tapings coming up March 22nd and 23rd in Philadelphia. In Rebellion, and followed by Impact tapings on April 20th and 21st. Under Siege, and followed by an Impact taping on May 3rd and 4th, and then Impact tapings on May 18th and 19th in Newport, Kentucky.
And the DVDs are coming out, right? On Impact Plus or TNA Plus, if you will, which is pretty cool because they used to have some pretty good DVDs back in the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are like nostalgic for those, especially like when independent DVDs was like a big thing, and like TNAs certainly were some of the best produced. So they're going to have those sort of like if you imagine like Coliseum videos coming to WWE Network at the time or Peacock, this is kind of like that
Yep.
similar idea. And we've given them credit for this before, but TNA in their social media, as soon as a Thunder Rosa Diana Purrazzo um, uh, tag team or rivalry was announced, then they shared on their socials that Thunder Rosa and Diana Purrazzo had fought at Slammiversary 2021, and you could subscribe to TNA Plus. When it's free, then they refer you to YouTube.
What is going on with GCW? We always talk about GCW. They got a lot of shows, but I feel like lately here they've got a ton of shows, maybe more than ever going on right now.
Yeah, I have to do a count. Maybe I guess we could do it quarter to quarter, so that we don't have to wait till the end of the year. But big weekend for them in Detroit. Uh, 7 rows deep in terms of their um, uh, staging. So actually, I asked our friend Josh Olson in Detroit because they're 7 rows deep seems like impressive for them. Plus GA, like what's the setup really like? So right before we're recording this, he was kind enough to send me a video and let me know that the setup is one raised stage level with several rows of seats that overlook the ring, 2 areas on the floor with 6 or 7 rows of chairs, and one raised GA section. So we don't think about it as like 4 rows all the way around. So like if we compare like a show in Atlantic City, which has 4 around, seeing 7 in Detroit isn't necessarily more tickets sold. But we could compare it to past shows in Detroit, which started out hot at this venue at Harpo's and then was down for a little bit. So this is definitely a good showing. In Rochester, in a smaller venue, Brett is certainly looking at the GCW team. I'm looking at it. There's 1 ticket remaining in Rochester, so I'm sure that will be sold out by the time that you hear this. So a good weekend for them upcoming. Skipping over the collective, maybe we'll have a guest on to talk about the collective before that happens soon. But in California, in LA, at the Ukrainian Culture Center, they're moving along. Eventually, they'll get there, either sold out or they'll do well. Just a few 3rd-row seats left. 5th-row ringside, a fair amount of tickets still remaining, and just 1 or 2 seats in some of the other rows that are closer. And in Florida, on May, in Tampa, plenty of tickets remaining for that one. They announced a return to Chicago, Thalia Hall. I have to look up how that's pronounced, but I think it was Variety that was shared with me by WrestleTix had covered it, that it was 24,000 or 25,000 gate, if I remember correctly, and then Columbus. So just to summarize for them, so Detroit and Rochester, March 23rd and 24th, skipping ahead of all of the collective shows. LA, GCW on April 2nd, Albuquerque on April 21st, Tampa on May 3rd, Gringo Loco show in Jersey City on May 5th for Cinco de Mayo. Chicago and Columbus, May 25th and 26th. Atlantic City, okay, so that's something else to mention on June 1st and 2nd. So those Tournament of Survival, those shows always do well. And it looks like the tickets are certainly off to a hotter start there than the previous Atlantic City shows. Nothing new in terms of announcements with big New Jersey news, so still waiting on that. And Phoenix, where they did really well last time, is June 16th return.
Now, as far as MLW is concerned, is obviously they've got some shows coming up, but maybe a show coming up very soon with a little bit of a history lesson and a little bit of the American Dream Dusty Rhodes involved.
So Friday, March 29th is the show in Florida at the War Chamber show. So St. Petersburg, Paul Guzzo of the Tampa Bay Times wrote a nice article, an interview with Brett Lauderdale. I'm going to read a significant chunk of it now because I think it's really interesting. In 2006, as part of the WWE writing teams, Dusty Rhodes and Court Bauer had a meeting with McMahon that left them confused. McMahon, who also played an on-screen version of himself, wanted to wrestle God. Our marching orders were to fill in the episode leading up to this bill, Bauer said. After McMahon left the room with his half smile, Dusty said, "Thank God he's paying me a lot of money." Bauer, who'd once run his own promotion that held shows in Florida, said Rhodes then tempted him by wondering aloud what it would be like to quit and promote their own events in Tampa, where Rhodes was the biggest star in the 70s for championship wrestling. Rhodes died in 2015, but Bauer has not forgotten. Now head of MLW, Bauer will hold the show at the Coliseum in St. Pete. The event features a main match between two teams, the War Chamber, two rings surrounded by cage. Bauer, 45, has held Tampa Bay, again, starting his own, it's also the first wrestling card Bauer has held in Tampa Bay since starting his own promotion, dedicated to Rhodes. It's full circle, he said. MLW is firmly established as a promotion. It has distribution in 60 countries, TV and pay-per-view deal, and is internationally known. Stars like Matt Riddle and Davey Boy Smith and Mystico. We are commercially viable, Bauer said. Bauer said he owes the success in part to Rhodes, who once gave him advice while dunking cookies in beer. "I never wanted to be a wrestler, but always wanted to be in the wrestling business. I wanted to work behind the scenes." He first put that dream to use as an 18-year-old poli-sci major in Maryland, where he won a contest asking fans to serve as a matchmaker. "I get to the show and it's a totally different card. It's not anything I presented. But I started harassing them to let me do something behind the scenes, and they finally let me." He helped construct the ring and eventually moved into websites and poster design that led to making connections with other promotions who hired him to scout American talent for a Japanese wrestling company. By 2002, Bauer thought he was ready to run the promotion. The third show was held in Fort Lauderdale with main event featuring Rhodes versus Funk. "I didn't think I had to do anything else but just put the match on and the world would come." This was Florida, where Dusty was hottest in his prime. The venue held 1,500, but 500 showed up. Dusty peeks through the curtain, wearing those granny glasses, and he says, "This isn't going to be a good show." But he and Funk invited Bauer back to their hotel. It was there that Rhodes gave him advice. He said, "Every promoter from the most successful leagues is going to have these nights, but it's a question of why it turned out this way that you have to answer." And then he walked me through promoting and understanding it. One issue is I didn't market enough. I needed Dusty Barnstorming. We didn't have him doing local media. Another problem was Bauer catering to the diehard fans and not offering enough for the casual fan. And he was trying to do too much himself. Dusty said you need to get those teams, great roster, and a game plan, and explain how to get those. The promotion shuttered in 2004. A year later, Bauer joined WWE. He really gave me the fundamentals, the political elements, economic elements created. Bauer left WWE in 2007 and reformed MLW as a podcast. Rhodes went on to NXT. I was so happy he got to go full circle and go home to the Sunshine State. Bauer branded MLW as approached again. It's been successful this time, thanks in part to lessons learned. I look at the show and Dusty's down in a kind of sentimental way. I owe Dusty so much.
I love that. I love the connection with MLW and Court and Dusty. Hopefully the St. Petersburg show does well down there. Now, as far as the NWA is concerned, I know we always talk about them every week here. What's the latest? Because they're bringing back a Dusty Rhodes original. Speaking of Dusty,
NWA will present the 2024 Crockett Cup on May 18th, with the event being held for the first time ever in the Lone Star State. The event will be held in Fort Hays, Texas at the OC Theater. So I got a chance of the map, which just came out today as we record this, and about 15 tickets sold. I don't want to make that a thing. It just came out, so I don't want to make a thing of that. But just mean to say that I'm looking at the map and like a quick count. I have like about 500 or 600 seats to this theater venue. There's no GA as far as I can tell. So seems like a good venue choice, the right choice for them. Sometimes you can pop a bigger potential, of course, as a Dothan, and the tickets are already on sale for their Looks That Kill show all the way in December, following their last successful show there. There's a show where they're not selling the tickets, but it's co-branded. This is, of course, with World League Wrestling. I believe it's Leland Race, it's Harley Race's son, so it's a Night of Champions, NWA versus WLW on March 23rd. Joe Casada, one of his affiliates in Tennessee, is having a show with NWA talent on hand. Right? So some of it is fully NWA branded, some not. Casada's old school. It says that tickets will not be available online. They could be purchased March 29th at the high school. NWA Exodus. So this is EC3's promotion out of Cleveland, I believe. So they're going to have the real one there, much to some people's consternation. But I think, when you have an asset on the table, depending on, your balance and what you want to do, I think that's someone to consider. This is on May 11th. So some of these sort of branded NWA shows, but 3 of them actually to be exact, and then the Crockett Cup, and then tapings in Tampa, and then in Dothan at the end of the year.
When you look at, obviously, NWA, they do have some cool old school stuff, and obviously they do have the territories again. But when we always talk about OVW, what's going on with them? Are they going to be touring more? Or are they going to be sticking to that Ohio Valley area? What's going on with OVW?
Yeah, so there's quietly, I mean, the most important thing is that people who want to go to the shows know about them and where they are. But they are doing some shows that are outside of their direct region. London, Kentucky on March 30th. April 6th in Nashville, so a neighboring market. And then May 2nd, something called the Waterfront, so which is pay-per-view. So I'm not sure if that's a free event or something that they're streaming, and then they have their shows at the Davis Arena. For a while, we were hearing about this hot sellout streak. Not hearing as much about it now that they're not featured as probably on Netflix. So curious to see what ends up happening there. But I like when they tie into Louisville's history. Join us for a Stark Night as we celebrate 150 years of the Kentucky Derby Festival and 30 years of OVW. Okay, so this is the reference to the Waterfront. Will be live on pay-per-view on a special Thursday night, May 2nd, downtown at the Waterfront. So I'm imagining it's like an open air space where a lot of people are there for Kentucky Derby, and hoping to attract them maybe to watch the wrestling. So curious to see about that. And then Ultra Pro Wrestling, which, John, you can let me know. I'm not sure. I feel like they've been promoting themselves for a while, this video game. I'm not sure if it's actually out or it keeps anticipation that it's coming out, but OVW will have playable scenarios and wrestlers in the game.
Yeah, I don't think it's out yet, as far as I know. I think it's coming out soon. But yeah, they have been pumping it up for a while.
So a nice way of OVW's branding itself outside of its direct efforts.
Now, maybe a promotion I've never heard of, but obviously you're well on it. What is British Kingdom Pro Wrestling?
That's all I'm learning, but an interesting article for sure. So this is via the North Somerset Times. Portishead is becoming a hotbed for wrestling as sellout crowds have forced show organizers to move to bigger venues. The last event, hosted by BKPW, featured Brian Kendrick and sold out the 200 capacity Somerset Hall in January. This time, Japanese star Machozuki Jr. will take on Lee Hunter at the 300 capacity Gordano School Hall. The influx of both foreign and home superstar wrestlers the former Portishead area is a trend that has been steadily increasing over the past few years. They, excuse me, the promotion has hosted 4 events in each of the last 2 years alone, and the buzz and support from local fans has kept the starts returning. Promoter Nadia Agali said, Portishead shows are always so well attended, and the fans are so great here. We're able to bring in the biggest stars and grow the market. This quote I like. It comes from Pascal from Wrestling Pro. These stars are more used to wrestling in 27,000 seat arenas than towns where the total population is 27,000, but they absolutely love it in Portishead. The crowds are loud and they know the wrestling. Homegrown talent also know that Portishead shows are the ones to be on, and the competition is fierce. The match is being made possible by a partnership between BKPW and large, prestigious Japanese wrestling promotion Dragon Gate, which is seeing an exchange of wrestling stars between the UK and Japan.
Man, another promotion. So many wrestling promotions here. Hopefully, they're all are able to be successful. I feel like there's so many, even all over the world, even in England. It's just a lot of pro wrestling.
Yeah, I always find it amazing, like how like smaller promotions here in the US, like that they can afford to like fly someone in from Japan or even from Europe and vice versa. Now I know that sometimes when it's an international promotion, one place seems pretty far from the other, but in Europe necessarily it's not. Of course, Europe and Asia are fairly far from each other, but sometimes you could get things like the meet and greet money, and they used to call it DVD sales. I'm not sure how lucrative it is to do like a stream unless it's a big show. But I think a lot of the promoters are of course fans themselves, so sometimes they want to take the risk just to have a person on that they've always wanted.
The Juggalos are back. JCW Juggalo Championship Wrestling. The Juggalos strike back. What is this? What is going on with the Juggalos?
Yeah, it seemed like a little bit more from the Juggalos than we had in a while. John, I think I shared on this show already that I'm familiar with their promotion for a long time before they were ship wrestling. It ended in a T instead of a P, and
Yes.
I had the VHS tape. I couldn't get through it. I was like, at a time when I watched all wrestling, I just couldn't watch it. It was pretty bad, but I'm sure they've evolved in different ways from then. But Friday, May 3rd, they'll be at Newport Music Hall in Columbus, Ohio. It's a music hall, right? So it's music venue, so it's just general admission with a stage. So I'm assuming, which is a hard thing to do, like to put a wrestling ring on the stage. It might the map isn't that detailed, so they might still have like the ring on the floor and then have seating around it, maybe seating on the stage. So curious about that. I'm not sure if we'll ultimately know, given the size and scope of the show, but we could potentially watch it. I'm just not sure how. JCW Lunacy TV taping. So I was trying to like Google that. I couldn't find it. If there's any juggalos in the house, woo woo, give us an update where you can watch Lunacy. But it sort of got me curious, like what have they been up to, the last while as a promotion. So Cage Match doesn't necessarily cover everything that they do. I know that when they had, I think it was in Texas, like one of their festivals, not as extensive as like the Cave and Rock thing that they used to do. I think this was indoors. They had a portion that was JCW, even having some well-known deathmatch wrestlers on the show. But previously, what was listed was going back all the way to October 2023, run in Detroit, Bloody Mania in Thornville, Ohio. A co-promoted, I think, fundraiser in Brownstone, Michigan, going back 2022, Hollowicked in Detroit, Bloody Mania in Tombville, Ohio. Okay, so we see like a pattern here. So for a couple of years, it didn't look like too many prominent shows. They just had like, okay, Detroit, Ohio, and so on. So curious to see what this lunacy thing is and if they can expand. They're always like interesting because they just have the means financially. They have a lot of supporters, and they're huge wrestling fans. So whenever they're involved in wrestling, it's something interesting to look into.
Now, as far as CZW is concerned, I saw something that really caught my attention. The Murphy Rec Center is still out there. It's still a venue in Philadelphia. Obviously, the original home of Ring of Honor. But what is going on with CZW?
So bringing it back for the first time in 20 years at the venue, I think that's over WrestleMania weekend. I think that's a smart move. It's a venue people are curious about. It has like a certain lore to it, up to an extent. But it also seemed like a good time to just check in, like, what have they been up to? So, as we touched upon a little bit, they have their home base running regular shows at Havre de Gracie, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Maryland. It looks like sort of like monthly shows, the Limelight. Then they'll have a show on May 18th in Baltimore, Best of the Best. They had their Death Tournament of Death show in October 2023, of course, on the I believe it's a family-owned farm in Townsend, Delaware, which allows them to get away with it. And most curiously, which we touched upon at the time, I'm not sure how well it did, but in November they had a show on a battleship in Camden, New Jersey.
When you look at what's going on with the CZW, though, just in general, it feels like, I don't know, they kind of went away for a while. Now they're now they're coming back with a bunch of shows. But Tournament of Death, I know you love, obviously, but the one at the Murphy Rec, that definitely caught my eye, just because I was like, wow, Murphy Rec still going strong. Awesome.
Yeah, it's hard to break through, and for more than a moment there, they were doing really well in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, and the Tournament of Death seemed to get a lot of attention. Unfortunately, somebody almost died. Thankfully, they did not, in Nick Gage, which was covered well on Vice. They have their social media, on YouTube. Like, they have a number of followers still, so that has a fair amount of revenue. But there were rumors that a couple of years ago that GCW wanted to buy them before they went and then basically purchased the original brand that spawned GCW to run sort of like smaller shows, Jersey Pro. But for whatever reason, they didn't want to sell. The thing that confuses me about CCW, which has never really been clarified, when you look up their trademarks, they're owned. They seem to be owned by the company that does those, like, I don't know if it's fair to say low rent pay-per-views. I think they just have some. They just put them up on Amazon recently as well, like women, cat fights, MJF before he was a star and probably before he was paid decently, like that sort of thing. I don't mind like taking like archival footage of like somebody like when they were at the minors, quote unquote, but some of the other ways that they promote is like probably different than intended. Especially if you're a female wrestler trying to make your way, and now you have to be like associated with this. So they have that, and then there's the person that's known as their owner, the wrestler, whose farm it is. So I'm not sure who has
John
what.
Zandig?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Zandig, but right? Didn't
Oh,
he
DJ Hyde.
sell-
DJ Hyde, yeah.
Yes, DJ Hyde. Yeah, thank you. So Hyde, right? Like, so that's his farm, I think. And everyone knows him as the owner, but like when you look up the trademarks or copyrights, I believe that it's under this other ownership group who has a lot of like wrestling content tapes, and they're the ones that put out like CCW compilations.
So as far as big time wrestling is concerned, I see they're actually making a comeback. I haven't seen them do a show in a couple of years, and now they're coming back with a Kurt Angle show.
Yeah, so like thematically, I guess we're kind of like rolling into it, right? JCW is quiet. CCW has been doing its thing quietly. Now, big time and Northeast wrestling. So first, big time wrestling. booking Kurt, like, so I think it's like a good business model, even maybe if they ran into struggles the last couple of years, or maybe the timing just wasn't right. That a lot, like when you go to the ticket sales page, it's not just like buy tickets and then when you get there, maybe you'll pay for like a meet and greet. It's like it's sort of like a half convention, right? Like you pay for the meet and greet in advance or some sort of fan experience, so that one covers the other. Um, Webster Town Hall, I think that was where ECW had taped some shows. A fairly traditional wrestling venue in Massachusetts on March 22nd. Matt Riddle versus Kalisto. But right, like they were going to have a Hardy tour, and then of course there was the driving under the influence circumstances and so on in the summer of 2022 for Jeff Hardy. I forgot the exact circumstances, but so now they have this show in Massachusetts, and then they'll have another similar show in Altoona, Pennsylvania, also with Kurt Angle on June 1st. But looking back, was the show when we actually interviewed the promoter in advance of that, the Return of the Dragon show in Raleigh, North Carolina, which happened all the way back in November 2022, which seemed to be a success. But maybe that was a big undertaking, and it was time to like sort of figure things back out.
True. Now, Northeast Wrestling is having some big shows as well, but Riddle looks like he's kind of all over the indie scene. I mean, he's in MLW, he's in New Japan, he's in Big Time Wrestling, he's in Northeast Wrestling as well. So Riddle's everywhere.
Yeah, it's sort of like we've been thinking about like what's the place of like different promotions, and I think a market has continued to be created, and this sort of market has existed since basically the WWF went national in the 80s, with sort of like you run less of places that you used to run, and then there's still interest in that market, right? Like where WWF used to tape their shows, All American or whatever it was called in the early 80s, then like the Samoans and like Sergeant Slaughter and so on would be at like headlining cards there because you know that there's fans there. So now WWE is sort of focused on like more of A towns, less, although they still go, they're in Westchester County Center and so on, but less touring. And we've heard AEW is like seeking to focus more on bigger markets. So you have these towns in Connecticut and upstate New York and Ohio, parts of Ohio and so on that are underserved. So you bring in a Kurt Angle for the autograph signings, you bring in Matt Riddle to wrestle, and it could be successful. It's a different alternative than a GCW, which can be sometimes the hardcore alternative, but also like that like super indie where you bring in the best workers or people with the best buzz. Whereas sometimes people just want to go with their families and they don't want to schlep all the way out 2.5 hours into Pittsburgh, so they'd rather catch the Stars in West Virginia, and they know Matt Riddle and they want to meet Kurt Angle.
Very true. Very true. Now, just wanted to mention this because I just found it very interesting as far as AEW is concerned. The ratings again were exactly the same, 800,000 for the second show with Mercedes Moné. So it just feels like whoever they bring in, even Okada, I mean, before that, and Osprey, the same exact rating. So you're not gaining any fans, the same exact rating every week. Pretty crazy. And they had that odd thing where Rampage was after Dynamite this week because of the March Madness tournament and because of where TBS, TNT, True TV all they all play the tournament nonstop. So that got moved, and that was a 541K the last hour, that third hour, which was after the 2 hours of Dynamite. So it doesn't seem like a lot of I don't know, a lot of buzz around Mercedes Moné. Even though if you read people online, this is a huge deal. It just doesn't seem like the ratings are equaling what they should be.
Yeah, I didn't get to see like the storyline that she's being built into, but I think it's sort of like you have to have a way of engaging someone. It's always the first time somebody comes back. People are curious. They weren't that curious to stick around to make sure she wasn't coming back on the show or coming back much the second week. But you have to find something for someone, right? Like Jerry Jarrett, like issue, whatever that quote is, he'll say like issues make money or maybe you need something compelling to want somebody to watch. So speaking of March Madness, before my bracket gets completely broken, and I filled out 25 of them, so part of it was the luck of the draw. But in the best one, I got 15 out of 16 correct, so I was in like 99th percentile, at least as of this recording, before the first game ends on the second day.
Whoa, you're not doing that bad. I think Kentucky losing, I think, killed it for everybody.
Yeah, I thought I had them going deeper everywhere. So I think if my teams win, then I really win because no one else would have picked this. After a while, my son wanted me to fill out all 25 on like the ESPN, so like we'd have the best chance. I'm putting up air quotes, but somehow in this bracket that I'm doing the best in, I have San Diego State to win it all, who are a number 5 seed. So I don't know what I was thinking. I was just probably trying to get through it at the time.
You got some money on that one? That's got to be a rare one for sure.
So with the ESPN, if I win, $125,000. So I'm probably the only crazy person to do that unless it's somebody's alma mater. So I'm curious to see.
Yeah, true. I mean, that's crazy. And just to kind of go back just to wrestling for a second, I just noticed they say, we're in a boom period because of WWE and the hotness of it. Man, what is it, 9 sellouts in a row for WWE as far as just these big markets? They just seem to be on an absolute tear. Kind of crazy that they're going to the Mohegan Sun for a show, I think I read. So I was like, that's a smaller venue for them considering the hot streak that they're on.
Yeah, like sometimes it's hard to predict in advance. I think that sometimes they get confused between Foxwoods and Monkey Sun. I think Monkey Sun was the one that hosted UFC back in the day.
And Bellator recently, yeah.
Because I saw UFC in the Connecticut casino back then. It was a lot of fun. So it's a pretty nice venue. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but they got me. I will be going for the first show since that holiday show, John. I'll be going to the Brooklyn show on April 1st, the Raw, which is the last Raw before WrestleMania.
The Rock will be on that one, so good choice there. Good pick.
Yeah, I probably the last time I saw him was when he did the return at Survivor Series 2004, something like that.
I was there in 2011 as well, Survivor Series, with him and Cena against the Awesome Truth, who are somehow still a team now, and obviously going to WrestleMania. Very weird.
Yeah, I paid for that show in 2004 or thereabouts. Like I bought it the day of, like as a resale. Ridiculous price, I won't say, but it was a fun show.
Nice. Now let's hit the plugs here and head towards the finish. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Lavie, what do you got going on in this crazy world?
So, business of a business on LinkedIn. Follow our group. Follow me on Twitter at Lavie Marg, LAVIEMARG, or otherwise known as X. And check out our friends. We are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, and they have you fully covered for the collective and everything you need to know for the independent scene for WrestleMania weekend.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.